when you have recidivists, repeat offenders, what do we need to change about the debarment process so that that is the default instead of disqualification? Because disqualification is an insufficient penalty to me for recidivist offenders.
I believe that the government suspension and debarment process is an effective process. And USDA has implemented regulations, and as a whole, the department could do a better job of implementing that. I think that there are concerns, as the Undersecretary has expressed, about timeliness and length of time. I think we need to engage in those discussions because my understanding is that if you've got somebody convicted of a criminal felony, that disqualification, while it may be effective vis-a-vis the food stamp program, it's not really as effective for other government programs. And if you've got a criminal conviction, it should be a pretty quick process because the conviction in and of itself is sufficient evidence to proceed. And so it should not take a long time to do this, maybe a month, 2 months.
Well, let me say this. I distinctly remember spending 4 days in a courtroom prosecuting a lady for disturbing a school. And I spent 3 days in a courtroom prosecuting someone for throwing an iced teacup at a DEA agent. So resources and time should not be the only barometer by which we decide whether a case should be prosecuted or not, or else we would never prosecute petty crimes. So whatever needs to be changed in the process, I hope you'll give all of us that have expressed an interest in it a list so we can put a little more teeth into the punishments when people systemically defraud the government. And I want to move to the General Aid from California and Mr. Meehan's point about NCIC. You know, NCIC has arrests that don't result in convictions. It has pardons. It has expungements. It has other information that law enforcement may have an interest in seeing, but they're not convictions. But the remedy is very easy because schools do it and churches do it and after-school programs do it. Just have one NCIC trained operator on site and then redact the non-convictions. The notion that we can't do background checks on people who want to do business with the government, people do them all the time. For schools, churches, everyone does it. So, you know, redact the information. Go to a law enforcement agency that does track convictions. Go to the clerk of court's office. There's a way to get that information other than NCIC. And if there needs to be an exception to NCIC for government agencies that are looking at fraud, I can't speak for the gentleman from Maryland, but I'll be happy to do that. And I don't think law enforcement would resist it one bit. Ms. Fong, you mentioned a 50% conviction rate. I would have been run out of office if I had a 50% conviction rate, and I don't think Mr. Cummings would have been hired as often as he was hired if he had one. Why? That strikes me as a low conviction rate. Is it because you're negotiating a civil punishment instead of a criminal punishment? Does the statute need to be changed? What needs to be done so we don't swing and miss half the time?
Let me take a look at that data because I want to make sure that I get you the right percentage, and I'll provide that for the record. And when we do that, we will also provide you with our insights on that.
All right. And my final question for you is this. If I wrote the numbers down right, you said there are 900 cases, 600 of which are against
Let me just generally address the approach that we take on law enforcement. We focus our efforts on the retailers because when we go to the U.S. Attorney's offices for federal prosecutions, they have certain thresholds for prosecution which involve dollar amounts, et cetera. And so the dollar amounts tend to be on the retailer side, which are much higher. When it appears that there are recipients involved, as there usually are, we partner with the state prosecutors, because those tend to be violations of state and local laws. And so our most effective approaches are when we do joint work, where we take the retailers to the federal prosecutors, the state prosecutors work on the individual recipients, and we can approach all of those as a global kind of approach.
Well, that sounds like a perfect marriage, and you're going to need witnesses against the retailers, and sometimes the recipients make very good witnesses. With that, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney.